Chapter 3. Kep didn't see TJ the rest of the day, not during riding lessons, which Max refused to participate in, and not in the dinner line. Tella dashed a bit late to her usual spot, still wearing the shimmery pink dress and holding a "Liberty to Animals" sign. The sketch showed caged chickens and penned pigs. Before Kep could congratulate her again on her shooting, the cook, a fat man wearing an apron covered in faded red stains, stormed out from behind the food table, holding a wooden spoon like a hatchet. "Someone took wire cutters to the chicken coop." He aimed the spoon at Tella. "That's stealing property." She sniffed. "Maybe someone doesn't think living creatures are property. Maybe someone saw them as prisoners of war to be rescued." The cook smacked his spoon against his open palm. "They're animals! If God didn't mean for us to eat them, he wouldn't have made them out of meat." The dinner line grew behind Kep. Some diners seemed amused, others aggravated. "Don't you think it's a bit hypocritical," Tella asked the cook, "to be reenacting this whole liberty thing while you suppress the rights of animals?" The cook's face flamed. He whirled and returned to his spot at the food table. As the line moved forward, Tella stood to one side, silently holding her sign, eyeing the diners. When Kep took a plate, the cook slapped something black onto it. "What's this?" It had a strange shape and even stranger texture. "Beaver tail, roasted in the fire." He gestured to several campfires blazing nearby. Kep tried not to think of the fuzzy brown creature working on its dam. While he wasn't vegetarian, and certainly not vegan, he didn't eat swimmers, anything that shared his joy being in water. He'd never told anyone that. Even Mom thought he just didn't like the taste of fish. "No thanks." "You're going vegan?" Tella's eyes lit up. "Fab! After dinner, I'm going to report what I think were spur marks on a horse. Spurs! Can you believe it? Want to come with? We vegans need to stick together." Kep shook his head. "I'm not quite there." He still worried her animal rights protests might not go over well at the final competition. "Not to be rude, but have you ever considered toning it down a bit? There's a girl on my swim team who's vegan, but she doesn't treat meat-eaters like serial killers. She just quietly eats her tofu hot dogs and leaves everyone else to do their own thing." "Obviously, her quietly doing her own thing didn't change your thinking. Most people don't want to change. They like their drive-through hamburgers and don't want to know about the animal inside the bun. You have to agitate people sometimes to make change. It's not fun, but you can't lead from the crowd." "Yeah, whatever. I'll catch you later." Kep plucked a couple pieces of hardtack, a tooth-cracking biscuit popular in army camps, from a basket, took a bowl of vegetable soup, and headed off to find TJ. 5 minutes later, he spotted TJ roasting his portion of beaver. As he got closer, he heard TJ giving his bombast impersonation. Several soldiers had gathered to listen and laugh. "Voices can be hard," TJ said. "I started with bird calls." He gave an eerily perfect owl hoot. "Hey, TJ." Kep tapped his shoulder. "Can we talk?" "Sure. I mean, alone. Soon as I finish cooking this thing." The fire sparked and the beaver tail on TJ's stick puffed to twice its size. A rail-thin man stepped in to help TJ strip off the skin and slide the meat onto a plate. "Thanks." TJ took a small bite. "Not bad. Tastes like steak. Can I ask you something, Hamer?" The thin man nodded. "Why are there only 5 non-white guys in this place?" Kep hadn't noticed or thought about this. "The revolution is a mixed bag for people of color." Hamer put his stick with beaver meat into the fire. "History books sometimes make it look like white men were the only ones taking British bullets for this country. But truth is, over 5,000 black soldiers served under Washington, fighting for America when America didn't fight for them. Then, despite those sacrifices, despite the Declaration of Independence and a lot of promises, many were put back into slavery as soon as the war was over.
Some see reenacting that history as rather depressing.
Yeah, my sisters got invited here too, but they figure the Founding Fathers sold them out with the whole liberty for all except if you've got brown skin.
Several soldiers nodded. Kep blinked. TJ's sisters had a point.
What about you?
Kep asked Hamer.
Me?
Hamer asked.
I've got ancestors who were slaves. I figure if you've got an ounce of that heritage in your blood, you've inherited amazing strength. Takes an unbreakable spirit to survive what they did, and not just survive, but keep fighting to make things better. Fighting for freedom, helping each other. The ones that escaped risked their lives to help others taste freedom. And even if you made it north, you had to be mighty tough to survive economically with all the laws stacked against you. But they were in it for the long game, and I'm here to honor their fight for freedom, both their own and their country's. Freedom doesn't come free.
My grandpa says that. He's even got it on a bumper sticker, Kep said. He's a veteran, and he always makes me and my brother put flags out at the cemetery on Veterans Day.
I served our country, too. Nearly lost a leg.
Hamer held the meat close to the fire.
Far as I'm concerned, there isn't a single self-made man or woman in this country. We've all inherited the gifts of freedom. It comes in fits and bits, taken far longer than it should, and fair to say it's a work in progress. But we travel in the shadow of those early freedom fighters. We all walk on the shoulders of giants.
I like that. You and my grandpa would get along great, said Kep. My great-grandpa gave his life fighting for this country. A pilot in World War II.
TJ looked more serious than usual.
He was an officer, but they wouldn't let him into the officers' club for dances and stuff because he was a black man. My mom said at some bases they even let captured German officers go dancing at the clubs. The enemy got in, but not my great-grandpa.
Well, that's awful. Kep felt sick at the unfairness.
Those pilots had to fight the government before they could fight the enemy.
Hamer shook his head.
Lots of them couldn't leave their training bases, even in off hours. Jim Crow was alive and well in the communities around them. Nothing given to those folks. Every bit fought hard for.
My mom says it's easy to talk freedom, harder when it comes to the nuts and bolts, said TJ.
Kep had never given a lot of thought to freedom's nuts and bolts, but to treat people differently because of their skin seemed like the ultimate in cheating. When another reenactor approached Hamer and started chatting, Kep asked TJ,
Can we talk now? Sure.
TJ set down his plate and they walked away from the campfire.
What's up? Actually, I just wanted to ask if your house was robbed, like a month ago? No.
TJ's eyebrows shot up.
Why? Just wondered.
Kep felt relieved. No more crazy conspiracy theories.
My mom's a patent attorney, TJ added. One of her clients does high-tech security systems, and we've got their top of the line. I don't think the CIA could get in our house.
Some of Kep's relief faded. Had someone targeted TJ's family, then backed off due to security?
Is that it?
TJ looked back toward the fire.
Tella's on the prowl, and I want to finish eating before she finds me for another lecture on the evils of a carnivore diet.
Fine. See you later. After dinner, TJ and Tella were scheduled to listen to Bombast's lecture on famous battles of the Revolution. Kep and Max were assigned to crack codes used by Washington spies. They had 2 hours to complete the assignment, so they returned to the barracks, but Max had them figured out within 15 minutes.
Should we ask for more codes?
Max rested his chin in his palm and yawned. Kep shook his head.
I've missed 3 days training. I want to get in some time at the lake. Let's take a break and meet back here in an hour and a half. Okay.
Max pulled out his suitcase and extracted a book, Self-Defense, Weapons from Common Household Items. Kep just shook his head again.
I'm not even going to ask.
Minutes later, he told the slouched guard at the fort's gate that he needed to use the latrine, which was true. Something he'd eaten wasn't sitting so good, and he couldn't bring himself to use the chamber pot tucked in the corner of their cabin. Kep climbed through the wicket, a tiny cutout door, so the enormous gates didn't need to be opened for every hold run. When he reached the latrine, he held his breath at the stench. For a minute he indulged in the memory of flushing ceramic toilets and sinks with hot water. Mostly he wished he'd known enough to smuggle in some rolls of toilet paper. At least he had sufficient lung capacity to hold his breath a long time, and even better, the box of corn cobs wasn't empty. From the latrine, he headed toward a small lake outside the fort. He doubted the sleepy guard was doing a head count awaiting his return. A faint path curved along the lake's edge. He followed it, swatting at biting flies that welcomed him with open teeth. From his pocket, he pulled a Ziploc bag that kept a brochure dry and safe. The creased photo showed an Olympic-sized training pool gleaming in Florida sunshine. The words below he knew by heart. Gold medal swim camp graduates have won 45 gold medals and set 11 world records. For a moment, he pictured himself in that sparkling blue water. Olympic-level coaches advising him on stroke strategies to take his swimming to the next level. But someone had to pay for all that, and that someone was him. Kep pushed through thick shrubs for a place to undress, swimsuits being inauthentic. A faint humming that didn't sound like insects grew louder, and a minute later, a modern black camera jerked back and forth, startling him. It was mounted over a door built into a rock outcrop and had a sign that read, "Danger, high voltage, all trespassers prosecuted." Hardly authentic. Why high voltage in a camp with no electricity? And a camera? He didn't want to get in trouble for swimming, but he also needed to stay in shape. After moving away from the camera, he crouched behind some bushes to strip off his clothes. Since 18th century men didn't wear underwear, undressing went quick. Then he dashed into the chilly water for some privacy, ignoring the sharp rocks that bruised his feet. Once the water reached waist-high, he paused, pushing away floating green scum. He'd read in a magazine the value of visualizing success, and took a minute, as he did before each workout, to picture himself with gold medals slung around his neck. Then he imagined the sound of a starting pistol and swam hard toward the opposite shore. Slap! His right arm hit the water, then his left. Faster and faster he pushed himself, slicing through the water, ignoring the payback pain his lungs dished out over the last 10 yards. When he reached the other side, gasping for breath, he felt better than he had all day. He didn't have a race clock, but he'd covered the distance, about 100 yards, fast. Maybe it was the ultimate in no-drag swimwear. Call it skinwear. Maybe it was just being back in his comfort zone. One thing he knew for sure, a person didn't need to be good at school to be good in the water. Last summer, when the dentist told his parents he was grinding his teeth and psychological stress often caused the habit, they'd brought him to a child psychologist. Mortified didn't begin to describe his feelings sitting in a waiting room for wackos. When they finally called his name, he went into a room with purple walls, lots of plants, and a golden Buddha statue. The psychologist, a woman with short black hair and red glasses, had him look at ink splotches and asked him a bunch of questions. He answered what he hoped were the correct, non-crazy kid answers. After, she sent him out to a waiting room while she talked to his parents. Not about to miss that conversation, he'd made noisy footsteps away, crept back, and lay down, his ear to the bottom of the door. Kep's obsession with an Olympic medal is a defense mechanism, the psychologist had reported to his parents. He's unconsciously covering feelings of inadequacy through overachieving in swimming. This inferiority is often intensified by comparisons to siblings. After that meeting, he never again heard, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" But he knew deep down that his parents were disappointed he wasn't as smart as Max. Dad once made a joke about a kid whose only A was in gym, and Mom shushed him when she'd seen Kep standing in the door. Gym was the only class Kep aced. His dad had turned bright red and insisted he didn't mean Kep. Then he added, Not all people are book smart. That doesn't mean you're not smart." Kep tried to look like he didn't care, but being odd man out in their brainiac family was no fun. Kep finished his swim, raced back across the sharp rocks, and ducked into the shrubs to avoid the camera catching him in his birthday suit. In the midst of retrieving his clothes, a door slammed, and he jumped. Squatting, he peered through the thick leaves. Qureshi and Sergeant Turner had come out the door in the rock and headed his way. He dropped to his stomach. "A Detective Martinez came to the fort this morning." Qureshi's voice sounded a few feet away. The hairs on the back of Kep's neck stood up. Detective Martinez was the guy investigating his house robbery. Why was he here?
"What did he say?"
asked Turner.
"Apparently the Westguard brothers' house was robbed. He hinted there could be some link to camp. Sounds ridiculous, but it's got me thinking. Could Fox know about them? Have someone planted here?"
Planted here? Maybe this Fox person was from another team? Like that Spygate thing where one NFL team secretly taped another team's practice to get their defense signals? Maybe this Fox person robbed them to get info? But what good were toothbrushes and time travel research to a reenactment competition? And he'd only come to camp because he'd been robbed. If it had been a rival, somehow wanting to discourage competitors, they'd have been better off not robbing him. None of it made sense.
"Impossible with the background checks we do."
Kep lay perfectly still as biting flies landed on his back and feasted. Granted, $2,000 was a big prize, but infiltrating a history camp to spy on the competition?
"The clock is ticking," Qureshi continued, "and we still don't know what they could be facing. Washington spy ring infiltrated? Benedict Arnold hands over West Point?
This must be about the competition. The first day of camp, Bombast had shown them a big chart of what-ifs. He'd called them turning points, without which America would not exist, and that they'd trained to reenact them.
"Is Annie going to tell them?"
Turner asked. Hadn't Mule said someone named Annie was the bigwig of the camp?
"An issue of hot debate. If they refuse to go, there's no backup team."
Tell us what? And after putting up with this nightmare training, then not go? That wasn't happening. Quick footsteps sounded on the path, and a new voice Kep couldn't place announced,
"Miss Qureshi, we've cracked part of Fox's code. Read this."
Paper crinkled. After a pause, Qureshi said,
"The fate of the nation was riding that night? What's that supposed to mean?"
"I don't know, but Ramsey said to tell you there was a museum theft he just found out about. An entire collection of maps of the original Boston streets in 1775.
Boston, 1775? My God, he's getting rid of Paul Revere. Fox will topple the revolution before it starts."
Kep racked his brain to remember who Paul Revere was. Some poem? Revere takes a midnight ride to warn people about the British? And hangs a couple of lanterns. Was that going to be part of the competition?
4 children against a man like Fox?
Qureshi's voice had a shrill tone.
"He'll destroy them."
Kep didn't move until the footsteps and voices faded. So, Fox was an adult. Were they going to compete against adults? She said he'd destroy them. Could they hold their own? Tella had beat that adult sharpshooter, so maybe Qureshi underestimated the team. This place got weirder by the moment. It didn't help being a couple 100 miles from home with no easy access to a phone. The sun moved farther down on the horizon, a glowing orange ball. Above his head, a woodpecker drummed steadily on a dead tree. The air buzzed with cicadas while his brain buzzed with confusion. As he walked back to the barracks, a coyote howled. The area around the camp was sheer wilderness. If he and Max ever did want out, could they even find their way? A small piece of crumpled paper had blown under a shrub. Kep picked it up, but couldn't read it. It looked like a code, so he tucked it into his coat pocket for Max. By the time Kep got back to his barracks, it was dark and candles flickered in the windows. He opened the door to find they had visitors. A woman in a navy suit talked to Bombast. Weird. Bombast, who had his own way more plush quarters, had never visited their barracks, and he didn't recognize the woman. "I was in the area and decided to drop by and check on my son." She set down a briefcase and put an arm around TJ. There was a strong family resemblance, same square jawline and large brown eyes, but while she looked like some television lawyer in her wrinkle-free suit, high-heeled shoes, and nail polish, TJ looked a bit rough 3 days into their no-showers camp. The other difference? She was all smiles, while TJ looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "How can you be in the area?" TJ asked. "We don't even live in Wisconsin." "I can't check in on my only son?" "But Mom, don't but Mom me, mister. Just let me know how you're doing. How camp is going." "It's fine. Stop worrying. They're not really sending us to war." "Read history, don't live it," offered Max from the top bunk. "My new motto." "You've got a point." TJ's mom looked around the cabin. "No air conditioning, running water, or electricity, but that's window dressing." She squeezed TJ's shoulder. "I hope what you're learning makes you honor your ancestors' sacrifices. Their grit," TJ held up a hand. "I get it, Mom." Kep bit his tongue. TJ's mom clearly didn't know just how real 18th century America the medical supply kits were. Just seeing a parent, though, a normal person wearing normal 21st century clothes, made him feel sort of relieved. Max, on the other hand, started humming anxiously and kept darting glances toward the corner of the cabin. "Miss Steele," began Bombast, "camp rules clearly state, lucky for me I'm a lawyer who knows the difference between rules and laws." She winked at Bombast. "I'll keep my visit short. You may go now." Bombast left, closing the door rather harder than necessary. TJ opened his mouth to say something, but his mom cut him off. "I smuggled you in snacks in case they weren't feeding you enough." She snapped open her briefcase and unpacked an eye-popping array of granola bars, juice boxes, fruit cups, popcorn, and nuts. "Plenty to share. Introduce me to your friends." Looking less mortified, if still not happy, TJ introduced Kep and Max. "Westguard, your dad's name isn't Richard by chance?" she asked. "Yes." Kep stopped ripping off a granola wrapper. "Small world," she laughed. "I worked with your dad years ago in a lab as a chemist. There were 3 of us. Chip was our 3rd musketeer. That's before I decided I preferred patent law to chemistry." She gave a mock shudder. "Oh, those blood tests! God knows what chemical exposures they were testing for. I continue to check each morning to make sure my hair hasn't changed to purple." Kep's uneasiness returned. Another coincidence? Trumpets sounded outside. "That's tattoo, kind of like the final bell after class," TJ said to his mom. "Time to secure the post, go to bed, and for you to say goodbye. Thanks for the snacks." "I can take a hint. I need to make a client call anyway, and cell coverage is non-existent here in the boondocks." She looked toward Kep. "Will your dad be at the graduation ceremony?" Kep nodded, and she gave TJ a goodbye hug. No sooner was she out the door than Max scrambled from his bunk and dashed toward a tiny flashing light tucked in a corner. "Someone broke in and tripped the alarm. Must have been when TJ and me went to get extra candles. Check your stuff." TJ looked up from divvying snacks. "Broke in is kind of dramatic considering the door doesn't lock, but good you can ham it up for when they start filming." He checked his trunk. "All I'm missing is a handkerchief." Max looked thoughtful. "Dirty or clean?" "Dirty." "Is any of your stuff gone, Kep?" Max's forehead puckered. "Nothing." Kep considered telling them about the strange conversation he'd overheard, but decided to hold off. Max looked worried enough about the missing hanky. They started in on the mountain of snacks. "Dibs on the popper packs!" TJ ripped off the top of a box of caramel popcorn and dug out a plastic-wrapped prize that looked like a small credit card.
Cool! A mini camera! Kinda cheap plastic, but still.
He leaned his head toward Max's.
Selfie with genius, boy!
Kep glanced over.
If Bombast catches you with that, it'll be big trouble.
TJ stuffed the camera into his coat pocket.
When your brother gets his Nobel Prize and I get my Academy Award, that picture will be worth a fortune.
After they'd scarfed down their snacks, they doused their candles and hit the bunks. Kep tossed and turned on the scratchy straw mattress, but couldn't sleep. He was tempted to call up Grandpa Westguard. Grandpa had been a detective after he'd left the Navy and loved using clues to solve mysteries. He also stayed up late watching old movies so Kep wouldn't be waking him. Kep waited until he could hear soft, even breathing and slipped out into the moonlight. He still had the pick he used on Qurishi's door. Back at her office, it took several tries, but eventually the lock clicked open. The moon lit the office well enough for him to find the phone. He picked up the receiver, but no friendly dial tone sounded in his ear. He hung up and tried again. Silence. Feeling uneasy, he headed back to the barracks. A candle burned near Max's bunk. Max snored softly, an open journal on his chest and a feather quill on the floor. He must have gotten up to write a note. Kep put the quill back into its inkwell and took the journal. Out of curiosity, he glanced at the page. Among splashed ink marks, quills were really messy to write with. Max had written, "Stolen toothbrushes plus stolen dirty handkerchief equal stolen DNA samples?" The house robbery had made them both paranoid. They were at a history camp. No one was stealing used handkerchiefs. His own creeping around to call home didn't set a good example. He needed to stay focused on winning. So, despite being exhausted, he forced himself to do his usual 100 push-ups, then another 20 for going mental under pressure. Olympic athletes didn't have that luxury. Finally, he blew out the candle and lay in the dark. For some reason, his thoughts kept going to that time-travel army guy he'd seen at the shooting match. Something about Ramsey, something he couldn't put his finger on, bothered him, like a test answer he knew but couldn't remember. Long past when even the crickets had quieted, his eyelids grew heavy, and he fell into a dream. When the start horn blasted, Kep dove off the block into his lane, but something lurked at the bottom of the pool. It grabbed his ankle and thrashed him like a shark with its prey. Kep kicked hard, trying to escape. "Kep, wake up!" Sergeant Turner's tense face flickered in the light of a tin lantern. Outside the windows, explosions like fireworks filled the air.
What?
Kep opened his bleary eyes and tried to unscramble his brain.
"The fort's under attack. We've got to get out."